Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. This week we are going to be talking about books that broke our hearts. So yeah, I thought about that one and, is that going to be too much of a downer? But I don't think it's going to be. I think a lot of these books really end with hope. And sometimes our hearts have to be broken in order for us to change. So I think it's going to be a great week. So stay with us. Keep listening. There's still probably going to be some laughter. You're going to get new books to add to your book list. And if you want to get your hands on those books, you can request physical versions, hardcovers, paperbacks. Some of them will have the book on CD, large print, and a few, I think, this week even have book club kits. So if you want to get together with friends and talk about it, you can. Just go to our online catalog, request the items that you want. All of our branches are now open for curbside service, so those items will start moving to you. And when they are at your branch, you can call your branch and set up a time to go in and pick them up. A lot of the items are also available digitally, so you can see the website there that you can go to and check out how to get digital versions. Overdrive/Libby. Libby is the app. If you're getting this on a device, you can just search for Libby and it should come right up. And they offer ebooks and audiobooks. Hoopla offers ebooks, audiobooks, and also movies and music and graphic novels. And then RB Digital offers audiobooks and also magazines, week-long passes to Acorn TV, and week-long passes to the Great Courses. So all of that is available to you. So if you hear a title that you want to get, make sure to get yourself on the list or get it downloaded. And this week we have with us, there's 5 of us this week. And our introductory question for this week, I thought about this and decided, why don't we go with what is your go-to song when you are feeling heartbroken? So it kind of depends, how you define that heartbroken. I'll start. My name's Jennifer Greene. I am the community librarian at the Dundee branch. And I decided to go with one that I really like belting out. I can't sing, so I only sing in my car when I am alone, but I enjoy those songs where people who can sing do it, and then I pretend I can sing too. But I picked a song that for those days when I am feeling like I'm not good enough. You just feel heartbroken. I'm not a good enough mom. I'm not a good enough supervisor. I'm not a good enough librarian to my patrons. And so I chose from The Greatest Showman, This Is Me. And I'm going to say her name wrong, but Keala Settle sings it, and it's so beautiful, and the words are amazing, and it talks about having those broken pieces, but those are what make you who you are. So if you have a day that's like that, you can say, yeah, I'm going to apologize if I need to, but you know what? I'm going to keep going. I'm going to learn from this, and it just makes me feel better to just belt it out that this is me. So that's my song. So now let's have Jen Mccarty, who is a reference librarian at the Ellis branch, share what her go-to song for heartbreak is.
I had a hard time with this. So I finally settled on a song that it's not necessarily relating to heartbreak per se, but it's a song that always makes me feel something. And depending on the day, it might be a little bit different. So the song I picked is from one of my favorite bands, the Avett Brothers, and the song is called Murder in the City, which sounds a little bit scary, but it's, oh my God, if you've never heard the song, it's incredible. So the whole thing is, he says, if I get murdered in the city, don't go avenging in my name. And he kind of goes through like the little pieces of his life. In my favorite, well, 2 favorite parts. The very end of the song, he says, in the recorded initial version, he says, make sure my mother knows I loved her. Make sure my sister knows the same. Ugh, gets me every time. But I've seen them live several times, and there's a couple of live versions out, like on YouTube, and they've recorded a couple. They've updated that bit. So now it's make sure my daughter knows I love her. Make sure my son knows the same. And every time I hear it, I get choked up. And it just makes me so happy just to have this. I don't know. It always makes me feel, like I said, it makes me feel something regardless. My other favorite line in it, and I think this kind of brings it all together, is he says, it's or I'm gonna screw it up now, and I even have it. I have this in my house. I have this on a little plaque in my house. Always remember, there is nothing worth sharing like the love that lets us share our name. And I just love that so much. It's the whole song, a song called Murder in the City. You'd think like, this is not going to be a happy song, but there's so much hope and love in it, in that it's family, it's love. And, like I said, it's the evolution of it. And the first time he wrote it, it was my mom and my sister. And then it became, my son and my wife. And then it was, my sons and my daughters. And I just love it always makes me feel hopeful, and just reminds me of the love that we have with the people that we choose to share our lives with, and also like our friends. It's just the people in our lives that make everything better, and that's what that song says to me.
Aw, I actually am not familiar with that song, so now I have TV shows from last week, I have books from every week, and now I have music I need to go and listen to.
Avett Brothers is my absolute favorite band. I've seen them live a lot, and it's not something they're not a band that I thought I would like. They play the banjo, they're folk kind of rock. So good. So if you've never checked them out, look into the Avett Brothers, and Murder in the City is a great song to start with.
Excellent. We also have with us this week Isabella Arnold, and she is a processing clerk in our collections department. And some of you may be wondering, what's the collections department? They are important people because they make sure that the stuff is on the shelves. So it comes in and they take care of all of that background stuff so that you get those new books and new movies and new stuff as quickly as possible. So Isabella, what is your go-to song during heartbreak?
Well, I feel like I'm very fortunate in that my heart doesn't get broken a lot. So I wouldn't consider this song like a heartbreak song. But whenever I need like a little oomph in my day, I guess, I go to this song, and it is Dancing in the Moonlight by Harvest Kings. And yeah, it's great. It may have played for like 5 hours continuously when I was in labor at one point in time. Like, I just felt bad for the nurses. But it was great. I love this song just because like the guitars in it is just really amazing. It just makes you want to like groove. I do like a little shoulder dance when I listen to it. And it just makes me feel so calm, and it just is my go-to song in life. It's my life song, actually. So yeah, Dancing in the Moonlight.
Thank you. And we also have with us Marcia Langendorfer, reference librarian, outreach person, school liaison person at the Bedford branch. And what is your go-to heartbreak song?
Well, I felt like Isabella. I'm pretty lucky to not have it broken a lot. But one that I've always liked is by Patti Smith and Don Henley, called Sometimes Love Just Ain't Enough. And that song kind of always gets me where I feel like it applies to any romantic situation or just anytime, anything in life. And it's kind of, it just has a melody that gets to me every time. But if I'm feeling, Jennifer, when you were talking about those like pump up songs, anything from Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill, I mean, anything. That's my loud car screaming song.
That was almost my other one. I almost did You Ought to Know.
Yeah, that's
because there was a time in my life where that was like the only, and of course this ages me, that was the only CD in my car, and I would just listen to it. And that's a belty, angry one.
Exactly. So I feel like that's when you started talking about yours, that's what I was thinking of. And then I picked one from each. But yeah, so You Ought to Know by her, but also Sometimes Love Just Ain't Enough.
Yeah. Thanks. And we also have with us Mandy Dragonic, who is a cataloger at the collections department. So she's the one that makes sure that when you go into our online catalog and you type in an author or a topic, whatever it might be, that you are seeing things relevant to that show up. So Mandy, what is your go-to song during heartbreak?
So I have two, because I have one and this used to be my only go-to, but if I'm being honest, it makes me feel even worse. It's the song that I choose when I want to feel even worse than I already do. And so that song is, I don't even know the name of it. Time of Your Life. I Hope You Had the Time of Your Life by Green Day. Because I've had a lot of heartbreak, and it typically involves missing people. And so that was always my go-to but it's just going to make me spiral out of control song. So I actually have a much better one now that just acknowledges my heartbreak and my heavy heart, but then helps to remind me that I'm not going to wallow in that I'm going to choose a better, brighter path. And that one's called Yes, I Will by Vertical Worship. So it used to always be the Green Day, and now it's always the Vertical Worship. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to move into our books that broke our hearts. And I had a hard time, like I've been trying to theme my backgrounds. So I went with the cliched, sad, rainy window that I could just look out of. So that's why I have the rain in the background. So that's why that's there. Who would like to get us started talking about their heartbreaking titles?
I can go first.
All right, Marcia.
Okay, so I picked a couple today too. I felt like I was all over the place with this. I picked some that I generally book talk to in my high school classes, and I've been making some Zoom appearances in classrooms here at the end of the year, and these books always kind of come up for me. They're sort of oldie but goodies, I think. So the first one I picked was A Child Called It by Dave Pelzer. And if this does not break your heart, I don't know what will. It was one of California's worst child abuse cases of all time. Most people have heard of this or read it, but I'm finding when I'm in classrooms, a lot of them have not. So even though these books are old to me, they're new to the students. And so every time there's usually like a group of girls that want to read this together. So it's just horrific. It's horrific the things that he endures. I mean, not only was he locked in his basement, I mean, he was starved and beaten and asphyxiated by bleach. Like just horrible things happened to this boy. And when Jennifer said earlier how a lot of these do end with hope, he goes on to write, about his experiences through the foster system, The Lost Boy, a youth book. He also wrote A Man Named Dave. He wrote multiple books. And so you can kind of follow his life as it goes on, and just how anyone could persevere through these horrible circumstances, I have no idea. So I think that is one of the most heartbreaking books for me ever, because it's true. It really happened. And you can see him in, he motivationally speaks and he's in interviews, and to just think, I have a hard time not picturing what he went through as a child whenever I hear or read a book by him. And so that's still very, very topical, and it comes up a lot in the schools, in the classes. And then my second book is also, it's a young adult book, a YA book by Matthew Quick, called Sorta Like a Rock Star. And I love this book. It's very Amber Appleton. She's the rock star. She lives on Hello Yellow. She lives on a school bus with her mother because they're homeless. And she is such, I just love her, and my heart breaks for her every time. The book has sort of a Forrest Gump feel to it. She's very, they never really come out and say this, but it has Asperger's, and she's very literal with her interpretations and of life. And she has just some more tragedy come into her life throughout the book, and just the way she's so resilient and she's so literal and she's so positive. And this book, I felt like, kept breaking my heart repeatedly. So if you have not read Sorta Like a Rock Star by Matthew Quick, I definitely recommend that too. I book talk these all the time in classrooms, but they're great for any age. They're both very, very heartbreaking, but full of hope and inspiration as well.
I remember reading A Child Called It, and it just made my stomach churn, where I was just, how does this happen? But at the end, you really are so thankful for him being able to get through, and people who came into his life finally that were able to help.
And to be a father, and to be, like, I feel like how are you not broken? So I do feel like he's very inspirational.
Yeah. Has anybody else read either of those two?
I read them both. It's been quite a while since I've read Sorta Like a Rock Star, and I kind of forgot about it. And when you said you were talking about that, I was like, oh my gosh, that book was so good. So that is, and I read it as an adult, so I didn't read it as as a teenager. And it's a very, very good book. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Child Called It is always just, if you haven't read it, you should, just for the, I don't want to say the experience, because it's not, but it is. It's, I mean, there's so much to learn there, and just, the resilience, and just the what people can endure and still grow and become amazing people is just incredible.
All right, thanks, Marcia. Who would like to go next?
I will.
All right, Isabella.
So my first book I would like to talk about is Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman. Everything he writes is amazing. I feel like my heart has been broken in every one of his books. So I recommend you read them all, actually. And I mean, I ugly cry when I read this book. It's only like 76 pages. It's super short. You can read it in one sitting. And I just make the saddest faces and just cry and cry and cry. But it's all about an older gentleman who is dealing with the beginning of a dementia type disease. And he is learning that every morning it takes him longer in his mind to get back home, and you kind of see his development with the disease and with his relationship with his grandson. And one line that I cry every time I read it is he calls his grandson Noah because he loves his name twice as much as everybody else. And he has this rough relationship with his own son as his own son's growing up because they just have different likes and different interests. The father loves math and space, and the son loves words and music. And so they have this jarring relationship, but then towards the end, he says, Ted, and you realize that he loved his name twice as much also. I mean, my eyes are prickling. I can't even with this book. So it's just about, the mind as it's starting to deteriorate, and you don't want to lose on to those memories. You don't want to lose on to the people, but you know that you have to let go to say goodbye. And I love it. I don't own many books. I just realized, I was telling my mother earlier, I only own 8 books. 8 books. And this is one of them. If this is valued enough to be on my shelf, everybody should read it. And it's so sad, but it's also so beautiful. And to hear him speak about the love for his wife who had passed away earlier, and just the ultimate love of his grandson and the little things he does for his grandson. Another part of the story, he mentions that he told his Noah that he can't come into his office once he is taller than this anchor that's near his office. So he says, once you're taller than it, you can no longer come to my office. And so he puts rocks underneath the anchor so that he'll never be taller than it. And it's just I can't even. So yeah, and like I said, Fredrik Backman, he's the one who wrote A Man Called Ove, and my grandmother told me to tell you she's sorry, and Beartown, and Us Against You, and another cry one is his Everything My Son Needs to Know About the World. Oh man, I love literally everything this man has written. I love, and he has a new book coming out in September that's already in the catalog that you can request. I already have it on request. And so I didn't want to choose 2 of his novels because I felt I need to broaden horizons. So the other book that I really left a big impact on me was All the Light We Cannot See. That's my screen of it. And this one is by Anthony Doerr. And I mean, I feel like it's not your traditional heartbreak novel, but you really feel for these characters. And I can remember reading, I don't read a lot of fiction. And when I read this book, I just thought, oh my goodness, these characters, I just feel for them so much, both of them. And it's the story of 2 children from their adolescence growing up right before World War II. And it follows their 2 trajectories. My dog is trying to make an appearance in the background. His ears are particularly itchy. We need our groomer to open back up, I guess. And so these 2 children are growing up. It's Marie Laurel, who lives in France, and she is blind because of cataracts. And so she lives with her father, and I feel like her relationship with her father really tore at my heartstrings, because he completely takes care of her, and he builds her these models of their city so that she can always find her way home. And he works for a museum, and he's entrusted with moving this precious item out of the museum to save it during as World War II was starting to happen. And so they must travel to his uncle's house, which is in St. Malo, France, which is a little island that's fortified, like a little castle almost. And so they go there, and then as this is all happening, you see another story of a young boy, Werner, who lives in Germany, and he's an orphan, and he is super smart with mathematics, and you just really feel for him because you can see his life is just snowballing, and it's not really his own doing. Like, he loves mathematics, he fixes radios, he listens to these inspirational radio casts that just inspire him, and then because he's so good at this, he gets selected to go to like the Nazi school, and there they send him off to the battlefield to use his knowledge of math and radios, and he doesn't really want to go along with it, but it's the only way that his life, it's the only way out out. And so he does this, and then as they're living their journeys of Marie Laurel and St. Malo, and him traveling across Germany, they both end up he ends up coming to St. Malo to find this radio broadcast that's happening, that's kind of like a resistance thing, and then he finds out it's the radio things he grew up listening to about math and space, and then he ends up being this great hero and helping save Marie Laurel from some sticky situations, I guess. And so just kind of how these two are growing up. I cried hysterically through that one too, but it does have a happy ending. I don't want to give it away, but yeah, like it is really good. I feel like it's so well written, and just his use of language, and it's not necessarily chronological as you're reading it, but it's one of those books that I can't recommend it highly enough. I mean, besides my Frederick Backman books that I love so much, like this is the next one. So yeah, I mean, just the relationships that they build of Marie Laurel specifically, she has this dependency on people, and as they are slowly leaving her life, you feel like, oh, another bridge has been lost, and how is she going to make it? But she does, and it's so good. I like that one a lot.
We did that for book club, and it was very well received. I think almost everybody in the book club for All the Light We Cannot See just really enjoyed it. Sometimes World War II novels can be tough because you really got to find the good ones. There's so many out there, and that is one of the really, really good ones.
Yeah,
So.
I wasn't expecting to like it initially, just because it's like, oh, this is popular fiction, everybody's read this. But oh man, it was one of those books that you read and like you gobble it in 2 days, and then you think like, where am I? What has happened in the world? Like, are we still in the same zip code? Like, what is this? It's so good. Yeah, that's when I read on a Kindle, and I read it too fast.
Oh wow!
Just like slide it, anticipate it. So yeah, really good.
And Frederick Backman, I think the only one I have read is A Man Called Ove or Uva or Uve. The audiobook lady that I listened to, because I listened to the audio for A Man Called Uva, said Uva. But then I went online to find out how it was pronounced, and there were several different ones. But that one, yeah, that was fabulous. Also, A Heartbreaker with Hope. He's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope that he continues to publish books for the rest of his life, because I will read all of them. Like multiple, like literally, there's only been like one that wasn't quite as good, but all of them are amazing. Like there's so like the characters and the backstories, but also like the twists that the humanity in the people, like, oh, so good. I just want to move to Sweden and eat a lot of coffee with them. Yeah. It'd be great.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. All right. Mandy or Jen, who would like to go next?
I'll
All
go
right,
first.
Mandy.
So when I saw the theme, I was instantly taken back. Now, if you know me, you know that like nostalgia is kind of my thing anyway, but I was instantly taken back to the 4th grade when I read Where the Red Fern Grows. It was the first book that I ever really remember crying at while I read. And like Isabella, I ugly cried. I just sobbed for, it felt like forever. So it's a book about a little boy who grows up in the Ozarks. And when you meet him, he's 10. And he finds an ad from a magazine that sells coon dogs, hunting dogs. And he gets it in his mind that this is the thing he must do. He has to have these dogs. So it's during the Great Depression. He knows that his parents do not have the money to buy him dogs. He asks them anyway. They affirm that no, they can't afford that. And so he goes on a mission to save every dime he makes. And it takes him 2 years, and he does. He saves the $50 that the ad says these dogs will cost. He goes to his grandpa, who owns a general store, and says, I don't want to bother with my dad with this. Can you help me get these dogs? And his grandpa is actually kind of instantly upset, thinking that he must have stolen this money. How else could you get $50 as a kid in the Depression? But he comes to realize that no, he's just worked so hard. And so they get the dogs, and he gets these little adorable puppies, and he names them Old Dan and Little Ann. And he teaches them how to hunt, and they become the best hunting buddies ever. They're like the best little hunting team there ever was. And his grandpa knows how good they are. He enters them into this contest. They go through the contest. I won't tell you if you win or not. And then some sort of tragedy befalls them. And I was literally heartbroken. I had never owned a dog, but I did have a cat. And all I could imagine was if something happened to my cat, like these dogs, that I was just a big blubbering mess. I read it again as an adult, and while that part was sad, kind of what breaks my heart as an adult, in the end, he's telling the story as an adult. And he talks about how they moved away, that's part of the story, and how he would like to go back. And it broke my heart that in all of this time, he's never gone back. And even if he were to go back there today, whatever today was for him, the hills and the forests of the Ozark would not be the same place. And so for me now, it has that kind of you can never go home again feel to it also. So it's, I mean, I don't know. There's just something about that book. And I remember at the time everybody else was reading it. I'm guessing there's a movie that came out in the 80s. And so I'm guessing that's probably like we all read the book after the movie came out, because all of my friends and I too were just all about Old Dan and Little Ann. So.
That one is a really hard one. I'm just going to open it up here. How many of you have read Where the Red Fern Grows? Yeah, as soon as I saw that you were going to be talking about that, I was just like, even just the memory of reading that book. That one's a heartbreaker.
It feels just like your background. Exactly. My other book is also from, I think, junior high for me, though. It was The Outsiders. And I remember reading that. And of course, there was also a movie at the time, which we read the book and then we watched the movie in my English class. And of course, it had all the, like, I'm dating myself, but all the heartthrob boys of the time were in this movie. So, but it's told from a boy named Ponyboy Curtis. And it's about him and his brothers, Soda Pop and Daryl. And their life, just their life. The book takes place in the course of, I think, about a week's time. Ponyboy and Soda Pop and Daryl, their parents were killed in a car accident. And so they're just kind of plugging along at life, doing the best they can. There's a huge us versus them theme that runs throughout the book. In this book, us being Ponyboy, they're called the Greasers. They're kind of like thugs. They and this book was written in the 50s. So, side note, it was written in the 50s by a teenage girl. And it's kind of considered like the first book written for teenagers as well. It's like the first YA novel, kind of. Anyway, so they're all like wearing their leather jackets and their white t-shirts and their blue jeans. I picture them all looking like Fonzie, kind of. But life is not easy for them. It's always the greasers against the Socs, and they were like kind of the preppy kids, and they all lived in middle class, upper class neighborhoods, and they just never, they were oil and water, these two groups of kids. So one night, Ponyboy and one of his friends get to talking to two of the girls from the Socs, and they actually kind of hit it off. They have like normal conversation and meaningful conversation. And the girls' boyfriends run into the boys, and there ends up being a death. And so the two greaser boys have to hide. They have to flee. And so they get some money and they get a gun and they go hide in a church. While they're hiding, there's going to be a big rumble. And so all the greasers and all the Socs are going to fight it out. And they actually decide that they're going to come out of hiding. They're going to turn themselves in, and they're going to be part of this rumble. They can't be left out. But in the meantime, some children from another school, I think, I don't remember where they're from, end up in the church, and the church catches on fire. And so two of the boys, three of them actually, I think, end up going in, and like some redemptive factors to the story, they save these children. And again, some sort of tragedy befalls one or more of them. And it's just heartbreaking. It's just takes these characters that you love so much. And I mean, how do they even live like this day after day after day? And then what they go through is just, it's just heart-wrenching.
It's hard when you really, the way you said that about the characters, when you're so involved with the characters in a book and bad things keep happening, and you just want to like, I feel like I want to like reach out and go, here, you know, like, why does the bad stuff keep happening to you, and what can we do to make it better, even though they are fictional,
Right.
Like, like these are not real people, but some books just get you that way, where you just feel so deeply for those characters.
And there's just so many ways to identify with them. And the other thing I just want to mention about this book is I think of this story, now I haven't read it, I did reread it before this just to be a little bit fresher, but I hadn't read it since probably high school. But I think of this book every single time I walk out of a movie theater, because the very first line of the book is, when I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only two things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. And every single time I have left a movie theater, I think of this story. So,
oh, neat. Has anybody else read The Outsiders? Yeah, I read it sometime.
Oh, you have to read it.
I read it sometime in high school. I don't think I've ever seen the movie though, and the movie has like tons of big names in it, but I don't think I've ever actually watched it.
I had a young adult lit class in college, and we read that. Well, we were supposed to read it as one of the first like YA, and I still didn't do it. I think it was because my professor was like all about it, and she didn't like modern YA, and that irritated me. So I was like, I'm not reading your stupid book.
So it's your act of rebellion.
That was my,
well, it's one of those books though that like I think sorry, Jen. I think like in 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade, a lot of schools that's required reading now. But it's one of those books that when you read it, even if you're forced to read it for school, you fall in love with these people. You fall in love with the story. So
yeah. Thank you. All right, Jen. What are your heartbreaking reads?
well, first of all, I want to point out my background. I went the opposite way. If we're going to talk about heartbreak, I'm going to go happy place. So
Good idea.
So that's where we're at. I had once again, me going, I had a hard time with this. I'm a crier. I cry really easy. I'm that person crying at, long distance commercials when that was a thing. I've cried at insurance commercials. Like, why is that so heartbreaking? I'm a crier. So I actively stay away from things that I know will make me cry. I'm not one that's watching, you know, This Is Us or Parenthood when that was on. I'm like, please give me the happy things because I'm a crier. So finding heartbreaking books was like, but I don't like those. I don't want my heart to be broken. Okay, so my books. The first one I want to talk about is The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. A lot of you might recognize the name John Connolly. He normally writes like thrillers and crime kind of things. This was a total departure for him when he did this book. And it's was not at all what I expected when I read this book initially. The synopsis makes it sound like it's going to be kind of this lighthearted fairy tale-ish thing, and it is, but it isn't. So The Book of Lost Things follows David. This is also set during World War II. He lives in London with his father and his mother, and in the beginning of the book, his mother is ill. She ultimately dies, and you know it's dealing with, he's like 12, he's younger. So he's dealing with his own, you know, guilt of his mom. They live in London during World War II. Things are dangerous. A lot of people are leaving to go to the countryside. Eventually, pretty quickly, his dad remarries, and they move with his new stepmom named Rose to the countryside in England, which of course is a whole thing. You know, you've got this character who is just lost his mom. Now his dad is remarried. They're moving. There's a war going on. His mom and his new stepmom, you know, have a new baby. And David is so conflicted with all of his things, you know, what's happening here. So they're in the new house and they're trying to make him feel comfortable. They give him this really nice bedroom that used to belong to Rose's uncle, Jonathan, if I'm remembering my names correctly. And Jonathan disappeared when he was a kid. So David's in this room of this person who disappeared, and there's all these books. Jonathan was a big reader, and the books start whispering to him. And so the books kind of play into a little bit. This book kind of takes the real world and the character of David in particular. You kind of grow with David, and you go through all of David's feelings as he's struggling with, you know, the realities of his life. He feels super guilty about the death of his mom. Like he feels like he has something to do with it, even though of course he didn't. He feels guilty because she had a long sickness. And when it was over, you know, he kind of felt relieved. And then it's like, how do you feel relieved that your mom is gone? But, you know, so there's all this guilt. And then he's angry at his dad for remarrying, and he resents his new brother because he's taking all this time. So one night there's an air raid, and David hides in the garden and discovers this hole in the wall. And he, you know, hides in this crack in the wall. Well, of course, he's transported to another world. And this is where it starts to mix, you know, real world and fake world. He goes into like a fairy tale world, but it brings in all these fairy tales that we're familiar with, but in totally different ways. Like one of the first things he meets is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but Snow White is awful. She's not the Snow White that you'd like. She's like super gluttonous and she's lazy, and you know the dwarves hate her. They just want to basically like get rid of her. They want to like pay a suitor to take her away because she's so awful. You meet other fairy tales that you're, like I said, that you're familiar with, but aren't, like the Rumpelstiltskin is kind of in there through one of the characters. The Huntsman from like Snow White is in there. But what's kind of heartbreaking through this is you're in this fairy tale world and it's totally different, but it starts to kind of meld what's happening in Jonathan or in David's life with what's happening in the fairy tale world. And it really takes him kind of, you know, he's at that age where he's dealing with so much, but he's also at the age where he's just becoming an adult. And it's kind of his trajectory through not only dealing with all of his grief and his, you know, his own trauma, but also just that becoming an adult. And he kind of does that through this fairy tale world. So it's heartbreaking in a sense of just dealing with all of this grief and trauma and the growth of David, but so incredibly good. And if you're someone who likes fairy tale retellings, I mean, that's not the focus of the book necessarily, but it's so interesting to see the ways this goes. And of course, you know, there's the mystery of the missing uncle and how that ties into this fantasy world. But it's just such a great book. And if you've read David Connolly, it's totally different than anything else he's written. I'm pretty sure this is the only book he's written even remotely like this. But it's one of those books that you definitely feel the growth. And yeah, they're heartbreaking moments, but it's so good. So good. So
I've read his other series, the Charlie Parker series, and he gets into some supernatural stuff in there, but not in the same way.
Yeah,
I really like his writing style.
This was definitely like more fairy tale, and like the way it's perceived. Like initially, when my book club read it and I picked it up, we chose it as a like, oh, it's gonna be a fairy tale retelling, and it's dark. It's dark. Like even like I said, with some of the characters, Snow White, and she's awful. So it's totally, you know, a lot of people think like, oh, maybe it would be a good like kind of YA, and it's really not. I mean, it's a dark, dramatic book, but really, really good. And definitely World War II, a totally different take on the World War II angle. It's more of a backdrop to the story than part of it, but I mean, it's important that happens. So a good one. My other choice is by Rainbow Rowell, or Rowell, I'm not sure how you actually say it. It's Eleanor and Park. And so this book, it follows two teenage characters, Eleanor, who is poor. She lives with her mom and her awful stepdad and her siblings. And they're super mistreated. I mean, there's just all kinds of abuse. Her stepdad, Richie, is physically abusive to the mom, and he's just like classic neglectful to the children. They don't have enough food. They don't have enough clothes. All of the kids share a room. And she ends up going to a new school where she meets Park on the bus. And Park is, I want to get it right. I need to look at my notes here. And I don't see it. I believe he's Korean. So he's different as well. But he lives with his family, and they're super loving. So like these two people couldn't really be any different. Their backgrounds are so different, not just ethnically, but also, you know, they both obviously come from a similar part of town, but like Park's family has what they need. You know, his family works really hard. They provide, they have food, and it's a loving environment, where Eleanor comes from this kind of awful place. And they meet and they become friends mostly through music. They start sharing music back and forth. And it really is a first love story. You have these two people that are totally different, and they bond and they kind of form a relationship. And the heartbreaking bits come in, you know, first love. It's not always great. And you add Eleanor's life to it, and it's just something else. But it's so well written, and so it's just, I loved this book. When I read it, I was like, I just wanted to stay in this book. And there's all this talk of music and mixtapes, and it takes place in the 80s. And so that's kind of nostalgic for, you know, that sort of time. It's a little bit, even though things are kind of awful, particularly for Eleanor, like there's hope in it and there's joy in it, and that they're able to find these things together. But this is just such an incredibly good book, in that you have these two characters that they're learning through each other and they're growing through each other. But it's, you know, young love, and that doesn't always last, and that's sad. And then of course, Eleanor is just terrible home life. Like, how can she get out of that? How can she deal with that? How can she make that better for herself and for her siblings? And I don't want to tell you what happens, but it ends on like a very bittersweet note. There's hope and there's heartbreak. So if you haven't read Eleanor and Park, it's really, really good.
Has anybody read that one?
I haven't.
Oh, a couple of you. I haven't. So thank you, Jen.
There's nothing like a first love mixtape, though, is there?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Right.
I don't think I would, like, I'm pretty sure mine are all gone, but I don't think I would want to go back and be like, what was I thinking?
Oh, yeah.
Did they include a playlist like that you could go out online and like download with Eleanor and Park, or was that before that was more common?
Don't remember. when was this book written? I have my Goodreads up here. Let me see. It was written in 2013, so that definitely would have been a thing, and it won a lot of awards. I don't know if there's one specifically in the book, but I feel like Rainbow Rowell might have had something like on her website.
Yeah.
And she may still, I don't know, but
that's becoming sort of, I wouldn't say common, but if you get a book where music is a big part of it, a lot of them now will say, like, you can download our playlist at Spotify or wherever, and then you can go get the music and listen along while you're reading your book.
Yeah.
Excellent. It is surprising how quickly, though, just still thinking of the music thing, how quickly a song can take you back to a moment instantly.
Absolutely.
So that's neat how they tie that in. So much of that emotion tied into music.
And music is such a big part of that particular book because it's kind of how they connect. Initially, you know, it's like these two characters want kind of nothing to do with each other. She's kind of weird and she's poor and he's like sort of middle of the road. He's not a popular kid, but he's not, you know, the worst, but it's like he finds this girl who needs a friend more than anyone and they connect, and it's just, and music is the big connector for them, and that's, and I think that happens to a lot of us. Music is good.
Yeah. All right, and now my heartbreaking reads. This was a hard week for me because I, much like Jen and some of the rest of you, like as soon as somebody goes, this book made me cry, I'm like, yep, never reading that. I don't want to be sad. So the two books that I'm going to talk about, when I initially picked them up, I didn't think they were going to be heartbreaking reads because I wouldn't have picked them up. So here we go. So my first one is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. And if you look at the cover, what kind of book do you think that's going to be? It's got a monster. The cover's dark. This book is going to be a horror novel, which is what I expected. And then, because I hadn't, like, I guess I had probably seen some reviews. I knew Patrick Ness from, I'm not going to be able to think of it, but he wrote a trilogy prior to this, which is kind of science fiction dystopian. So I kind of figured we're going to keep going along that line. And that was not the case. Instead, A Monster Calls focuses on 13-year-old Connor, and you find out very early on that his mom is really ill, and Connor is really struggling. And at night, he begins to get visits from this monster that is created from a yew tree, Y-E-W. And I went and looked it up. A yew tree is, particularly in Great Britain and in Ireland in particular, is in symbology and folklore a sign of regeneration after death. And a lot of yew trees are planted near traditional church graveyards. And so that is significant that this monster comes, and the monster comes and tells him 3 different stories. And these stories are not the simple, straightforward, here's a lesson for you when you're struggling with a hard thing, and simplifying it. Instead, it makes it all more complex, that life is complicated, that death and loss is hard, and there aren't any easy answers. And so you work with Connor through this. These stories are unique and beautiful and powerful and complicated. And you watch as Connor struggles seeing his mom dying. And it's a beautiful book. And again, as soon as I would hear it's about a child whose mom is dying, I'm never reading that. I hope you don't do that. It is illustrated through, are you going to be able to see that? There's my background. It's illustrated throughout the novel. The artwork is beautiful. And then you find out the background to the story. The idea for the story, and the story was started, and she is Irish, and I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, but it's Chauvin Dowd. The story was started by her. She had written several YA novels. And then she got cancer and passed away. And Patrick Ness was given her idea and the outline of the story, and he created this. So all of that together just makes this amazing and beautiful. And even when you pick it up thinking you're getting a horror novel and you get something else, I fell in love with this book. Like, if I can put it into everybody's hands, I would, because it just speaks to the hard part of life and having to say goodbye to people you love. So that is A Monster Calls. Pick it up, even if you don't want to feel sad. Just tell yourself it's going to be a thriller and then read it anyhow when it's so that was fabulous.
I have to say, Jennifer, that book came out around the same time that I did lose my mom to cancer. And I had it on my to-read list, and one day my brother was like, hey, I saw you added that on Goodreads. And I said, yeah, and he's like, don't read it. And I was like, he was like, just trust me, don't read it right now. And I haven't, because that's always in my mind, because I knew what it was about.
Right.
And yeah, because he read it like during that time, and he was like, don't do it. Just wait. Just wait and don't read that book yet.
And I tend to be the person, I'm, still working through, showing the emotions and living in the emotion and not just pushing it aside. But I tend to be a person that will do my best not to cry, which is not really all that healthy. This book, I was ugly crying during. So I do think when you're ready for it, Jen, I think it's a healing book, but it's a painful book too.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
It's gonna wait.
Yeah. My other book is The Undefeated, and it is based on a poem by Kwame Alexander, and it is illustrated by Kadir Nelson. And I'm going to start talking about it by reading the official book blurb, because my words aren't going to do it justice. And honestly, I don't think the book blurb does either, but I'll get into that. So, this is based on a poem by Kwame Alexander, and it is a love letter to Black life in the United States. It highlights the unspeakable trauma of slavery, the faith and fire of the civil rights movement, and the grit, passion, and perseverance of some of the world's greatest heroes. It is beautifully, powerfully illustrated. Again, I know my little background's going to be weird, but it is here, and I'm just going to read the first line of it because Alexander's words are amazing. It says, "This is for the unforgettable, the swift and sweet ones who hurdled history and opened a world of possible." And it has a picture, again, my background's screwing things up, has a picture of Jesse Owens. Kadir Nelson's art is something worth taking time over. He uses blank space in a way that instantly made my eyes water. It's a beautiful book, and it broke my heart for two reasons. One, I read it on my own. It came through the library system. I read it and thought, oh, this is so amazing. But it broke my heart because there's illustrations of people in here that I had never heard of. And that hurt my heart as a human, that I'm missing out on stories. I'm missing out on important stories, and I haven't put the time and effort in to learn them. At the end of the book, there is a lovely, it names all the people in the book and then gives you a description of each person and what they did and what they accomplished and how they are the undefeated. So that's number one, why this book broke my heart, because it brought to my attention things that I have yet to learn. Number two, I took this book home and read it with my 11-year-old son. This is going to get me crying. Stop it. And he started crying when we got to the page. There's a double spread of a slave ship. And it shows how people were just put on there. They weren't treated as people, as humans. And my son started crying. And he looked at me and said, "Why would people do that?" I don't have an answer, man. Sometimes people are awful and ugly, but we can do better. And I hope I teach him that. I hope I learn from what is happening in the world now, and I hope that I learn to listen. And if you are interested in learning to listen to all the stories out there, please pick up this book, If you have children, read it first because you need to make sure that they are ready to process this. Share it with them, talk with them. Tony and I sat there and talked about the book for over an hour. We talked about all the people in it. I asked him, like, how many of these people are you learning about in school? He knew more than I did, so I was pleased with that. But there were still people he didn't know. And so that's my other heartbreaking book, because it brought to my attention how much learning about the world I need to do and how much more listening I need to do, and reading stories by Black authors, by people of color, by Indigenous people is one way of doing that. So that's my final book. If you haven't seen it, get on the list at the library system and take a look at it. The art's beautiful. In my review on Goodreads, when I first read it, I just said, give it all the awards. And it really did. It won Caldecott, it won Newbery, it won Coretta Scott King Award. It deserved all of them. And then I just said, nothing I say is going to do it justice. Get your hands on a copy, read it, ponder it, look up all those names that you may not know, and spend time with it. So that's my final heartbreaking book. Again, I didn't pick it up thinking it would break my heart, and it did. And I think it was for a good thing. I think it's a book that can create change, and that is powerful. So that's my final one. Thank you once again for being here and sharing your heartbreaking reads. And next week, we're going to be talking about books with memorable animals. So the animal doesn't need to be the main character. It's just got to be a memorable animal in there somewhere. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Thank you to all of you for sharing. Thank you to all of you who listen. And hopefully you'll listen again next week. Bye.
Bye.